If you're over 60 and you've noticed that your joint pain isn't staying the same, it's getting worse. I want you to know something important before we go any further. This is not just aging, and it is not your fault. Most people in their 60s are told some version of the same thing. You're getting older. This is what happens. Learn to live with it. And maybe you've accepted that. Maybe you've quietly adjusted your life, skipping the morning walk, avoiding the stairs, turning down invitations because you're not sure your knees will cooperate. You've been managing, but managing is not the same as understanding, and understanding is exactly what we're going to do today. Because here's what nobody tells you. Joint pain that worsens over time is not a random event. It is your body sending you signals, clear, consistent, biological signals, about things that are happening beneath the surface. And when you learn to read those signals, something shifts. You stop feeling like a passive passenger in your own body and start feeling like someone who actually has options. Stay with me, because there is one daily habit that most people over 60 are doing right now that is silently making their joint pain significantly worse. And it has nothing to do with what you think. Now here's where this gets genuinely interesting, especially if you're over 60 and you've been told that joint pain is simply the price of getting older. The truth is, your joints are not just wearing out. They are responding. Responding to what you eat, how you move, how much water you drink, how long you sit, and a cascade of biological changes that began quietly in your 50s and have been building ever since. Understanding those changes, really understanding them, is the first step toward doing something about them. But before we get to what you can do, let's talk honestly about what's actually happening. Because I think you deserve a real explanation. Not a pamphlet, not a list of tips, a genuine conversation about why your body behaves the way it does after 60, and why so much of the conventional advice you've probably received has fallen short. Let's start with the biggest piece of the puzzle, and that's inflammation. Inflammation gets talked about a lot these days, and sometimes it can feel like a buzzword, but for people over 60, inflammation is not a concept. It's a daily physical experience. You feel it when you get out of bed in the morning. You feel it when you've been sitting for a while and try to stand up. That stiffness, that ache, that deep discomfort in your knees or hips or hands, that is inflammation at work. Here's what's actually happening inside your body. As we age, the immune system undergoes a shift. Researchers have given it a name, inflammaging, a combination of inflammation and aging. It describes a state of low-grade, chronic, systemic inflammation that becomes more common as we get older. Unlike the inflammation you'd experience from a cut or an infection, which is acute, purposeful, and temporary, this type of inflammation is persistent. It doesn't resolve. And it targets tissues throughout the body, including the cartilage and synovial lining of your joints. Cartilage is the cushioning tissue that sits between your bones. It has no blood supply of its own, which means it relies on the fluid in your joints to receive nutrients and remove waste products. When chronic inflammation is present, that fluid becomes compromised. The cartilage gets less of what it needs and more of what damages it. Over time, it thins, it becomes less resilient, and the padding between your bones starts to break down. Now here's what makes this especially relevant for people over 60. Certain foods dramatically accelerate this inflammatory process. And the frustrating part is that many of these foods are deeply embedded in everyday American eating habits. Processed foods, packaged snacks, fast food, items with long ingredient lists contain compounds that trigger inflammatory responses in your body. Refined sugar is one of the most well-documented culprits. Studies supported by institutions like the NIH have linked high sugar intake to elevated inflammatory markers in adults. Fried foods, particularly those cooked in certain vegetable oils, contribute in similar ways. This doesn't mean you have to eat perfectly. But it does mean that if you're in pain and you're regularly eating these foods, there is a direct biological connection between your plate and your joints. On the other side of that equation are the foods that actively reduce inflammation. Fatty fish, salmon, sardines, mackerel contain omega-3 fatty acids that have been shown in multiple studies to reduce inflammatory markers in the body. Colorful vegetables, particularly leafy greens, are rich in antioxidants that help neutralize the oxidative stress that drives inflammation. Olive oil contains a compound called oleocanthal, which researchers have found works similarly to anti-inflammatory medication in the body. Nuts, particularly walnuts, are another powerful source of anti-inflammatory fats. These aren't miracle foods. They work gradually, consistently, and cumulatively. But for someone over 60 who's been living with worsening joint pain, shifting the balance of their diet toward these foods can make a measurable difference in how they feel. Not in a week, but over weeks and months of consistent change. Most people stop here. But what comes next is the part that actually changes things. Because inflammation is only one piece of this. There is a second force driving worsening joint pain after 60, and it is one that most people are not fully aware of. It's called sarcopenia, the gradual loss of muscle mass that begins in our 50s and accelerates through our 60s and beyond. Here's why this matters so much for your joints. Your muscles are not just there for strength and movement. They are shock absorbers. They are stabilizers. When you take a step, your muscles engage to absorb the impact before it reaches your knee. When you stand up from a chair, your quadriceps and glutes take on the load so your knee joint doesn't have to do all the work alone. Your muscles, in other words, protect your joints every single minute of every day. When muscle mass decreases, and after 60, research suggests we can lose between 3 and 5% of our muscle mass per decade without intentional effort to prevent it. The load shifts. Less muscle means more pressure directly on the joint surfaces, more wear on the cartilage, more stress on the tendons and ligaments surrounding the joint, and more pain as a result. Consider Margaret. She's 67, and for years she assumed her worsening knee pain was simply arthritis getting worse. Her doctor had confirmed she had some cartilage thinning, so she rested more, avoided activities that hurt, and over 2 years her pain got worse, not better. What was actually happening, though nobody had explained it to her this way, was that her reduced activity was accelerating her muscle loss, which was putting even more stress on her already compromised knee joint. The rest was making things worse. When Margaret started a very gentle, progressive exercise program, starting with just 10 minutes of seated leg exercises and short walks, something shifted within about 6 weeks. Not because her cartilage had regenerated, but because her muscles were starting to take back some of the load they had abandoned. Her knee had less pressure on it. The pain began, slowly, to ease. This is why movement is so important, and it leads us directly to the third major driver of worsening joint pain after 60. One that sounds almost too simple to be true. Too much rest is hurting you. I know that sounds counterintuitive. When something hurts, the instinct is to protect it, to rest it, to stop doing the things that cause pain. And there are absolutely times when rest is appropriate, after an acute injury, during a serious flare. But as a long-term strategy for managing joint pain, rest is one of the most common mistakes people make. Here's what happens inside a joint when it isn't moved regularly. Your joints are surrounded by a membrane called the synovium, which produces synovial fluid, the natural lubricant that allows your joint surfaces to move smoothly against each other. This fluid is only circulated effectively through movement. When you sit for long periods, hours at a desk, hours on the couch, synovial fluid pools. It becomes less effective. The joint surfaces begin to drag rather than glide. And when you finally do stand up and start moving, that initial stiffness and pain you feel is, in part, the result of those surfaces grinding without adequate lubrication. Regular movement, not intense exercise, but consistent, gentle movement throughout the day, keeps that fluid circulating. It keeps the joint nourished. It prevents the stiffness from settling in. Even standing up and walking for a few minutes every hour can make a meaningful difference in how your joints feel by the end of the day. And this is where it gets specific to people our age, because the relationship between movement, muscle, and joint health becomes significantly more important after 60 than it was at 40. At 40, your body had more reserves, more muscle, more resilience. It could tolerate long periods of inactivity and bounce back more easily. After 60, that tolerance is lower. The window between enough movement and too little movement becomes narrower, which is why what you do daily, not what you do occasionally, is what matters most. Now let's talk about something that is both incredibly simple and surprisingly underestimated. Water. Your joints rely on adequate hydration to function well. Cartilage itself is composed largely of water. Estimates suggest somewhere between 60 and 80% of healthy cartilage is water. Synovial fluid, which lubricates your joints, is also primarily water. When you're chronically mildly dehydrated, which is extremely common in adults over 60, partly because the sensation of thirst becomes less reliable as we age, the quality of both your cartilage and your synovial fluid is compromised. Dehydrated cartilage becomes less elastic, less able to absorb shock, more prone to cracking and damage under the pressure of daily movement, and synovial fluid that isn't replenished properly becomes thicker and less effective as a lubricant. The result is increased friction, increased stiffness, and increased pain. The simple act of drinking enough water throughout the day, not gulping large amounts at once but sipping consistently, supports your joint health in a way that no supplement can fully replicate. Most health researchers suggest aiming for somewhere around 8 glasses a day as a general baseline, though individual needs vary based on body size, activity level, medications, and climate. If you're taking diuretic medications, which are common in this age group, speaking with your doctor about your specific hydration needs is worth doing. Here's the part your doctor probably hasn't had time to explain. There are several daily habits, things you may be doing right now without thinking about them, that are silently adding to your joint stress day after day. Posture is one of the most significant. When you sit or stand with poor alignment, shoulders rounded forward, back curved, head jutting out, the mechanical stress on your joints is dramatically altered. Your spine bears load unevenly. Your hips compensate. Your knees absorb forces they weren't designed to handle in that position. Over years and decades, these postural patterns wear down specific parts of your joints asymmetrically, contributing to pain patterns that seem mysterious but actually have a very clear mechanical cause. Sitting for extended periods without breaks is another. Beyond the synovial fluid issue we discussed earlier, prolonged sitting tightens the hip flexor muscles, the muscles at the front of your hips, which then pull on your pelvis and alter the mechanics of how your knees and lower back move. Many people who complain of knee and back pain actually have significant hip flexor tightness as an underlying driver, and they've never been told. Footwear is the third habit people rarely think about. The shoes you wear affect your entire kinetic chain, meaning the force traveling from your foot upward through your ankle, knee, hip, and spine with every step. Shoes without adequate support, shoes that are worn down on one side, or shoes that alter your natural gait can all translate into increased joint stress far above the ankle. This is especially important for people spending significant time on hard floors, whether at home or elsewhere. Now let's talk about what you can actually do. Because information without a practical path forward is just frustration in disguise. If you're over 60 and your joint pain has been getting worse, here is a realistic, honest framework for beginning to change that. I want to emphasize the word realistic, because this is not a 30-day transformation promise. This is a sustainable approach designed for your body at this stage of life. Start with movement, but start small. If you've been relatively inactive, beginning with 10 to 15 minutes of gentle walking daily is genuinely enough to start. Not power walking, not anything that significantly increases your pain, a comfortable pace on a flat surface. The goal in the first 2 to 4 weeks is simply consistency, telling your body that daily movement is happening now. From there, gradually add time. Add 2 to 3 minutes of simple stretching before and after your walk. Focus on your calves, your hip flexors, your quadriceps, and your lower back. These are the muscle groups most commonly tight in people over 60 and most directly connected to knee, hip, and back pain. YouTube has excellent gentle stretching routines specifically designed for this age group. And this is one area where 10 minutes a few times a week can genuinely shift how your joints feel over time. Begin making one dietary swap per week rather than overhauling everything at once. Add a serving of fatty fish to your diet twice a week. Swap your usual cooking oil for olive oil. Add a handful of walnuts as a snack. Replace one sugary drink per day with water. These are not dramatic changes, but they are the kind of changes that accumulate into a measurably different inflammatory environment in your body over 3 to 6 months. Address your sitting habits. Set a gentle reminder on your phone, a timer, whatever works for you, to stand up and move for 2 to 3 minutes every 45 to 60 minutes during the day. Walk to the kitchen. Walk to the window. Do a few gentle knee bends. The specific movement matters less than breaking up the prolonged stillness. Pay attention to your footwear. If your everyday shoes are more than a year old and you spend significant time on your feet, consider whether they're still providing adequate support. This doesn't require expensive orthotics, though for some people those are genuinely helpful. A well-constructed walking shoe with good arch support and cushioning is a reasonable starting point. And drink your water consistently throughout the day. Keep a glass or bottle somewhere visible as a reminder. If you find plain water unappealing, adding a slice of lemon or cucumber can make it easier to drink regularly. One important note, and I want to be clear about this because it matters for your safety. This is educational content, not medical advice. If your joint pain is severe, rapidly worsening, accompanied by swelling or warmth, or if you're managing other conditions like osteoporosis, rheumatoid arthritis, or you're on medications that affect your bones or joints, please talk with your doctor before making significant changes. What I've shared here is based on well-established research, but your individual situation is exactly that. Individual. Your doctor knows your history in ways a video cannot. Now here's what to realistically expect. Because one of the most damaging things that happens to people who start making these changes is that they expect too much too soon. And when they don't feel dramatically different in 2 weeks, they give up. And that would be a genuine loss. The body over 60 changes more slowly than the body at 35. That is not a limitation. It is simply biology. Muscle rebuilds slowly. Inflammation takes time to reduce. Cartilage, once damaged, does not regenerate quickly. What this means practically is that you are working on a 3 to 6 month timeline to notice meaningful change, not a 2-week timeline. But, and this is important, many people begin noticing smaller improvements much earlier. Better sleep because they are a little more physically tired in the right way. A bit less morning stiffness after a few weeks of consistent movement. Slightly more energy. These early signals are real. They are worth paying attention to. They are your body responding. Don't dismiss them because they're not the dramatic transformation you hoped for. They are the beginning of it. By 3 months of consistent effort, not perfect effort, consistent effort, many people over 60 report meaningful reduction in their baseline joint pain. Not elimination in all cases, but reduction. A quality of life that is noticeably better. Movement that feels less like a negotiation with your body and more like something you can actually do. If any of this gave you a different way of thinking about what's been happening in your joints, I'm genuinely glad. This is exactly the kind of conversation I believe people over 60 deserve to have. Real information, honest expectations, practical steps designed for the body you actually have right now, not the body you had at 40. If that's the kind of content that's useful to you, subscribe. I'd love to have you here. And if you have a moment, leave a comment below. Which joint has been giving you the most trouble? I read them, and your experience genuinely helps shape what I cover next.